Hello you lovely lot, welcome back. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Have you ever wondered what's going on in the brain of somebody with FND? I know I have. Stick around and let's see if we can figure this out together. So let's talk about what happens in the brain of somebody who doesn't have FND first of all. So a symptom occurs, they pay attention to it, they worry about it, it happens a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, and their attention is drawn to it more and more and more. They go to the doctors, they have tests done, the cause of those symptoms are identified and a treatment pathway is then applied. Hopefully then those symptoms ease, your attention is taken away from them because they ease and they go away, and then you just move on with life. And that doesn't happen in the brain of someone who has FND. So let's rewind a little bit and talk about risk factors. And these are things that can increase your risk for getting a condition, a disease, catching something. For example, so smoking is a risk factor that's going to increase your likelihood of getting lung cancer. But smoking doesn't guarantee that you're going to get lung cancer, and if you've got lung cancer, it doesn't mean that you definitely will have smoked. So the same thing can be said for FND. There are certain things that might increase the likelihood of you having FND in your life, and there's various different types of risk factors, but I want to talk about just a few. You have trauma, and that could be psychological trauma, physical trauma, something that's caused you great distress. Then you have exposure to illness or exposure to injury, and those things, when they're happening, cause you to create, or your brain to create, incorrect neural pathways in your brain. Everybody has these neural pathways being created whenever they're stressed. And they just lie there dormant, not being used for anything, but it's a normal part of being human. But it does mean the more you have, the higher your risk factor for FND. You may very well have developed poor coping mechanisms when you were going through whatever distressing situation you were going through, such as relying on alcohol or drugs to help you cope, or self-harming is another one. They're not always very beneficial, but they enabled you at that time to cope with whatever was going on in your life. However, going forwards, it's not always going to be the best response to every traumatic or every stressful situation. In the case of people with FND, there is always a moment, a trigger moment. So for me, that was when I collapsed at work in May 2019. And I have to be honest and say that I spent a lot of time and energy, mental energy, physical energy, trying to nail exactly what happened on that day, at that time in May in 2019, because I felt like I needed to know. Because before I collapsed, I could walk and everything was not fine. I was ill, but I was walking. I didn't have any seizures, I wasn't having any tremors, I didn't have my face pulling to the side, I had nothing like that. And then something happened, and then they were doing all of those things. And I went into my impatience state, desperately wanting them to tell me, this is exactly what happened, and we can tell you what happened and how and why, and make sure it doesn't happen again. And unfortunately, that is not the case. They don't know. I don't know, they don't know. And that's difficult, and something I struggle with every day. I still struggle with that. Something happens, trigger, boom, done. Can't undo it, you can't turn back the time, and you just have to move forwards. And I've got an analogy that I'd like to share with you because it really helps me in explaining to people and to myself about this moment, this trigger moment, and FND in general. So imagine you're on a train track and you're just going along, and there are other train tracks that have been created by your brain. These are the incorrect neural pathways that are in your brain, just lying dormant, they're not being used. And then at times there comes intersections between the track that you're on and these other tracks. But if there's no trigger being pulled to swap you onto those other train tracks, you just stay on the correct one. However, if things line up, the timing is just right, then that trigger can be, that lever can be pulled, that trigger moment, at the time when they're crossing those two tracks, and you can shift onto the incorrect track, the incorrect pathway. It doesn't mean that the old track isn't there anymore. It's still there. it's just you're not on it, and that's why you can't go back. You just got to keep going, and there'll be times when the new track moves across and intersects with the old track, the correct track. But that really helps me to understand why I can't go back and change it, and just focus on where I'm going now. That really helps me. Okay, your symptoms are starting. So for me, that's paralysis, weakness, tremors, seizures, facial palsy, dystonia, where my face pulls to the side. Lots and lots of different symptoms can manifest with FND, because anything that can happen in the body is controlled by the brain, and so if the brain decides that it's not going to function correctly, it can affect any part of your body. So yes, if the brain controls it, then FND can affect it. And this is where it gets a bit different with people with FND. So the symptoms start, you start noticing it, and you're worrying about it, you start to feel fear, you start to wonder, what's wrong with me, what have I got going on? And then you're going to make predictions. If my legs are shaky, if I stand up, they're going to buckle underneath me and I'm going to fall, so I don't want to do that. This is normal human behaviour. This is designed so that we don't hurt ourselves. You know, if you go to stick your hand in the fire, your brain predicts that that's going to hurt. You'll get scared, you'll feel fear, fight or flight will kick in. If you did get your hand in the fire, it would burn, and then that's going to reinforce the fact that you don't ever want to do that again. And that's why we have that system in our brain. The thing with FND is you're having tests and they're coming back clear and the symptoms aren't going away, but you're being told that they can't find any reason for it. And while that's all happening and you haven't got any understanding of what's going on, your fight or flight is going to be on very high alert. You're going to be scared. What's wrong? Why can't they find out? You're going to have more attention drawn to the part of you that's not working properly, and you get stuck in a cycle. If my legs are shaking and feeling very weak, I would try and overcome it, especially when the tests are coming back negative and they're like, we can't find anything wrong with you. So I would be, well, in that case, I'm going to tell my legs that they don't need to be like that, and I'm just going to force them to stand up, which is the worst thing you can do when you've got FND. So I would try and stand up. I would be worried that I would fall. I would try and stand up, then I would fall. So the prediction's correct, and all I've done is reinforce that pattern of behaviour that I'm worried if I stand up I'm going to fall because my legs are shaking. I do fall over. The prediction was correct. I was absolutely right to be scared. I shall be scared in that situation forever now, because I know that that's a dangerous thing to do. And it just goes round and round and round, and those incorrect pathways become embedded. Again, think of it like the train tracks. The more you are going down a pathway, the deeper those grooves are getting, the more easy it is for your brain to take that way rather than the other ways. And the symptoms will then be sustained and just be carrying on. And when I say that forcing yourself to do something when you're in that high alert and your fight or flight has been activated is the worst thing you can do, here's a little bit more about why that is. So you have 3 zones. You have the safety zone in the middle, which is very comfortable. Nothing is distressing. Everything is as usual. You're not pushing yourself at all, and it's very easy. Then you have the middle section, or the next section out, which is the orange section, and that is where you're uncomfortable. But you're just trying to push the limits a little bit, trying to see what else you can do, and that's where all the learning happens. That's a good zone to be in, but it doesn't feel very comfortable like the green zone. But if you stray too far and you push too hard, you'll risk triggering your fight or flight, and then you're in the danger zone. And when you're in that red zone, no learning can happen. Nothing good can happen when you're in that zone. All you're going to do is reinforce those negative pathways, those incorrect pathways. Just stop, observe what's going on, relax, and just let it pass. And if you want to try again a little bit later, then that's absolutely fine. Once the adrenal glands have released the cortisol, which that's what happens when you activate your fight or flight, you have to wait for that to run its course. It's not going to happen because you've decided to. That chemical's in your bloodstream, you just have to wait for it to go. So you can see it's really important to try and stay in that in between the safe and the learning zone is where all the good stuff happens. And you've got to remember that all of these things are normal human behaviour and they all happen automatically. You can't force or decide to trigger your fight or flight response. It's an automatic response that happens in everybody. So this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for FND to be treated, because you can't cut it out, you can't numb that part of the brain, because you need all of those things to exist in this world as a human being. They still don't know what is going on in the brain of somebody with FND enough to be able to fix it. But one of the things that is key is to remember that you're not in control. Your symptoms are real. The cause of those symptoms may be different to structural damage, as in the case of MS, for example, but the symptom is the same. So there is the possibility that the brain can go back to the correct pathways. And if you apply yourself to certain mindfulness techniques and meditation and really trying to restrict how much your fight or flight response kicks in, that's going to help. It's definitely not a cure, and it's definitely not the only thing that's going on here, but it's one small element, and that's where the focus of treatment was for me when I went into the Rosa Burden Centre in Bristol for my inpatient stay. And in my case, I have been told I have a 20% chance at recovery from these symptoms that I have. So all of the mindfulness techniques and the stress relief and the living mindfully gives me the best chance at being in that 20%. I just really want you to remember that this is out of your control. It's an automatic response in the brain as a human. All humans have it, but there's something going on that's incorrect in the triggering of that, and also the predictions and the beliefs about what your body's going to do. It's got skewed somehow, and you're just stuck in this cycle round and round and round, and it's very, very difficult to change that. So finding out you've got FND is no easy thing. It's not an easy diagnosis to receive. There's very little known about it. There's no specific treatment pathway in existence. You have to fight to be believed. You have to fight to be listened to. You have to fight for support often. And I struggled with it, and I still struggle with it. But one of the things that I have learned, and I want to share with you, is the importance of believing that it's not your fault, that you're not guilty of anything, that you didn't do anything wrong. They don't know why the brain trips like that. There's some research to suggest that it might be to do with your autoimmune system. It could be to do with inflammation in the brain. It could be to do with the neurons misfiring and tripping. So there is actual physical damage to the brain when you're stressed. I did actually film an entire video on the physical effects of stress on the brain, which I will link into the YouTube cards up there, and I will drop the link down in the description box for you as well. It can be really hard when all the tests are coming back clear and you're still experiencing those symptoms. It can be really, really difficult to not feel like you're going to question your reality. One of the things I tell myself to help me with that is that just because there is no test currently that shows the malfunctioning of the brain doesn't mean it's not happening. And if you were to take apart a computer and it had a software problem, you could look at the motherboard, you could look at the casing, and it could all look absolutely perfect. It doesn't mean there's nothing wrong, because it's not the hardware, it's the software. And the tests just aren't out there at the moment. So, you know, years ago, when we didn't have CT scans and we didn't have MRIs, if you took an X-ray of somebody's brain who had epilepsy, that would come back clear and they would look like they were absolutely fine, but they're not, because the test isn't the right test for that condition. So I find a lot of comfort in that. It helps me anyway. It's a daily exercise in accepting the brain doesn't work properly. We don't know exactly why, but it is what it is, and just go easy on yourself. You know, that's what's needed in this situation. Be kind to yourself and be patient with yourself. It's not your fault. You're not in control and you're not to blame. So that about wraps up everything I wanted to talk about in today's video. And to summarise, I don't really know what's going on in the brain of somebody with FND. I know a little bit more each day, each time I look at things, each time I research things, each time I kind of sit and reflect on things, but nobody actually knows what's happening. There are some things we understand about what's going wrong in the brain, and there are some things that we don't. Hopefully we can move forward with a better treatment pathway for people with FND. Until next time, you take care and see you soon. Bye bye.